Chapter 2 of Famous Sea Fights by John R. Hale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Famous Sea Fights by John R. Hale. Chapter 2. Actium, B.C. 31. Actium was one of the decisive battles of the world, the event that fixed the destinies of the Roman Empire for centuries to come, made Octavian its dictator, and enabled him, while keeping the mere forms of republican life, to inaugurate the imperial system of absolute rule, and reign as the first of the Roman emperors, under the name and title of Augustus. It brought to a close the series of civil wars which followed the murder of his grand-uncle, Julius Caesar. The triumvirs, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, had avenged the assassination by a wholesale proscription of their political opponents, all of whom indiscriminately they charged with the guilt of the deed, and had defeated Brutus and Cassius on the plains of Philippi. They had parceled out the empire among them, and then quarreled over the spoil. Octavian, the dictator of the West, had expelled Lepidus from the African provinces which had been assigned to him as his territory. Antony was now his only remaining rival. Caesar's veteran lieutenant held the eastern provinces of the empire. During the years he spent in the East he became half orientalized, under the influence of the famous Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, for whose sake he had dismissed his wife Octavia, sister of Octavian, in order that the Egyptian might take her place. He had appeared beside her in Alexandria, wearing the insignia of the Egyptian god Osiris, while Cleopatra wore those of Isis. Coins and medals were struck bearing their effigies as joint rulers of the East, and the loyalty of Rome and the West to Octavian was confirmed by the sense of indignation which every patriotic Roman felt at the news that Antony spoke openly of making Alexandria and not Rome the center of the empire, and of founding with the Egyptian queen a new dynasty which would rule East and West from the Nile. The question to be decided in the civil war was therefore not merely whether Octavian or Antony was to be the ruler of the Roman world, but whether Eastern or Western influences were to predominate in shaping its destinies. Antony was prepared to carry the war into Italy, and assembled on the western shores of Greece an army made up of the Roman legions of the eastern provinces and large contingents of Oriental allies. During the winter of B.C. 32-31, he had his headquarters at Patrae, now Patras, on the Gulf of Corinth, and his army, scattered in detachments along the coast towns, was kept supplied with grain by ships from Alexandria. Antony's war fleet, strengthened by squadrons of Phoenician and Egyptian galleys, lay safe in the landlocked Ambracian Gulf, now the Gulf of Arta, approached by a winding strait that could be easily defended. But Octavian had determined to preserve Italy from the horrors of war by transporting an army across the Adriatic in the coming summer and deciding the conflict on the shores of Greece. An army of many legions was already in cantonments on the eastern coast of Italy, or prepared to concentrate there in the spring. His fleet crowded the ports of Taranto, and Brindisi, and minor detachments were wintering in the smaller harbors of southern Italy. Most of his ships were smaller than those to which they were to be opposed. It was reported that Antony had a considerable share of huge quinqueremes, and even larger ships of war, anchored in the Ambracian Gulf. The ships of the Western Empire were mostly triremes, but there was an advantage that while Antony's fleet was largely manned by hastily recruited landsmen, Octavian had crews made up of experienced sailors. Many of them were of the race of the Liburni, men of the island-fringed coast of Dalmatia, to this day among the best sailors of the Adriatic, and his admiral was the celebrated Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, who had to his credit more than one naval success in the civil wars, among them a victory off the headland of Mylae, in the same waters that had been the scene of the triumph of Duilius. Early in the spring, while the main body of Octavian's fleet concentrated at Brundisium, and the army that was to cross the Adriatic gathered round the harbor, Agrippa with a strong squadron put to sea, seized the port of Methone in the Peloponnesus, and, using this base as his place of operations, captured numbers of the Egyptian transports that were conveying supplies to the enemy's camps. Antony ought to have replied to this challenge by putting to sea with his combined fleet, forcing Agrippa to concentrate the Western armament to meet him, and deciding by a pitched battle who was to have command of the sea in the Adriatic. But Caesar's old lieutenant, once as energetic and enterprising a soldier as his master, had now become indolent and irresolute. He was used to idling away weeks and months with Cleopatra and his semi-oriental court. Instead of venturing on a vigorous offensive campaign, he left the initiative to his opponent, and with a nominally more powerful fleet at his disposal, he passively abandoned the command of the sea to Agrippa and Octavian. The Egypto-Roman army was ordered to concentrate on the southern shores of the Ambracian Gulf. A division of the fleet was moored in the winding strait at its entrance, but directed to act only on the defensive. Inside the Gulf the rest of the fleet lay, the larger ships at anchor, the smaller hauled up on the shore. The crews had been brought up to full strength by enlisting mule drivers, field laborers, and other inexperienced landsmen, and would have been better for training at sea, but, except for some drills on the landlocked waters, they were left in idleness, and sickness soon broke out among them and thinned their numbers. The ships thus inefficiently manned presented a formidable array. There were some 500 in all, including, however, a number of large merchantmen, hastily fitted for war service. Just as modern men of war are provided with steel nets hanging on booms as a defense against torpedoes, so it would seem that some at least of Antony's ships had been fitted with a clumsy device for defending them against attack by ramming. Below the level of the oars, balks of timber were propped out from their sides at the waterline, and it was hoped that these barricades would break the full force of the enemy's beak. But the invention had the drawbacks of diminished speed of the ship, thus making quick turning more difficult, and thus it increased the very danger it was intended to avert. Another feature of the larger ships, some of them the biggest that had yet been built for the line of battle, the dreadnoughts of their day, was that wooden castles or towers had been erected on their upper decks, and on these structures were mounted various specimens of a rude, primitive substitute for artillery, ballistae, catapults, and the like, engines for discharging by mechanical means huge darts or heavy stones. These same towers were also to be the places from which the Eastern bowmen, the best archers of the ancient world, would shower their arrows on a hostile fleet. But locked up in the bottle-necked Ambracian Gulf, the great fleet, with its tower-crowned array of floating giants, had as little effect on the opening phase of the campaign as if its units had been so many castles on the shore. Agrippa soon felt that there was no serious risk of any attempt being made by Antony to intercept the long and delicate operation of ferrying over an army of 100,000 men and some 12,000 cavalry from Egypt to the opposite shore of the Adriatic. He took the precaution of watching the outlet of the Ambracian Gulf with his swiftest ships. The narrow entrance, while making it difficult to force a way into the Gulf, had the disadvantage of all such positions, that a large fleet would take a considerable time to issue from it into the open sea, and it was therefore comparatively easy to blockade and observe it. If Antony showed any sign of coming out, there would be time to bring up the whole fleet of Octavian to meet him in the open. It was thus that Octavian was able securely to embark his army in successive divisions, and land it without interruption at the point of Toryne, on the eastern shore of the Adriatic. Having assembled there, it marched southward along the coast till it reached the hills of the northern shore of the Ambracian Gulf, and the two armies and fleets were in the presence of each other. The legions of Octavian encamped on a rising ground a few miles north of the entrance of the Gulf, and above a narrow neck of land which divided one of its inlets from the open sea. The coast is here hollowed into a wide bay, in which the main body of Agrippa's fleet was anchored, while a detached squadron observed the opening of the straits. The camp was surrounded by entrenchments, and connected with the station of the fleet by a road, protected by lines of earthworks and palisades, for it was the custom of the Romans to make as much use of pick and spade as of sword and spear in their campaigns. On the site of the camp Octavian afterwards founded Nicopolis, the city of Victory, as the memorial of his triumph. From the camp on the hill there was a wide view over the Ambracian Gulf, a sheet of water some 30 miles long